A television crew touches down in Mumbai. They have exactly 48 hours to capture the essence of a civilization that spans millennia. But here's what happens next. They don't visit the bustling airports, they skip the gleaming technology campuses, they ignore the world-class museums. Instead, their first destination is predetermined, the slums. The cameras are already set, the narrative is already written, the filters are already chosen. And within days, another documentary goes live. Millions watch it across the globe. And once again, an entire nation of 1.4 billion people gets reduced to a single, suffocating image. The image of poverty. The image of despair. The image of a country that never seems to move forward. But what if everything they showed was real, yet the story was still a lie? A recent viral video revealed how easily social media influencers can distort reality for attention. In the video, a European influencer attempted to portray her visit to India as frightening and chaotic. Speaking dramatically to her camera, she claimed to be surrounded by many people, creating the impression of an unsafe and crowded environment. However, later footage clearly showed that the street around her was nearly empty, with only a few passers-by going about their day. Her exaggerations didn't stop there. She expressed fear upon seeing a man with a gun, suggesting a sense of threat, when in fact the man was a uniformed police officer performing his regular duty. Later, she complained that her rickshaw driver refused to take her any further, implying that he had abandoned her midway. In truth, the driver had simply completed the short ride and politely asked for 50 rupees, less than $1, as his fare. The video quickly spread online, with viewers criticizing the influencer for misrepresenting normal situations as dangerous. Many pointed out how her narration and camera angles were deliberately chosen to create unnecessary tension and drama. This incident serves as a reminder of how online content can easily manipulate perception. In the pursuit of views, likes, and engagement, some creators exaggerate or fabricate experiences, turning ordinary moments into sensational stories. The truth, as this case showed, was far simpler. What appeared to be fear and danger was nothing more than everyday life, misrepresented for clicks. When exactly did journalism transform into a relentless hunt for human misery? At what point did telling the truth become less important than telling a specific kind of story? And who truly benefits when an ancient civilization, one that gave the world mathematics, philosophy, and spirituality, gets flattened into a single dimension of suffering? This isn't about denying problems. This is about something far more sinister. This is about selective storytelling. This is about a credibility crisis that Western media refuses to acknowledge when it comes to portraying India. Study the pattern. When international news channels turn their cameras toward India, they follow a script so predictable it's almost mechanical, overcrowded railway stations, open sewage drains, sprawling slums stretching endlessly, faces marked by poverty and desperation. These aren't accidental editorial choices. These are deliberate frames designed to construct a mirage and call it reality. Try this experiment. Count how many times cramped slum dwellings appear on screen versus thriving metropolitan centers like Gurgaon or Hyderabad track. How often you see stories about innovation, about cultural achievements, about scientific breakthroughs. The imbalance isn't random, it isn't coincidence. It serves a specific purpose: to maintain narratives that require India to appear perpetually stuck in poverty, even as it rises as a global power. Now imagine this scenario. Imagine if Indian news channels sent crews to London with one mission: film only the homeless sleeping in subway stations, or sent teams to New York to document exclusively the opioid epidemic ravaging communities. No landmarks, no success stories, no achievements, just crisis after crisis after crisis. The outrage would be immediate and deafening. Leaders would condemn it. Editorials would call it unfair and biased. Social media would explode with accusations of propaganda. Yet when Western media applies this exact same narrow, distorted lens to India, it's celebrated, it wins awards. It's called hard-hitting journalism and unflinching truth-telling. Here's the real double standard. When poverty appears in Western cities, it's framed as an isolated issue, a problem to be solved, a temporary setback. But when poverty appears in India, it becomes the defining characteristic of the entire nation. It becomes the only story worth telling. This reveals a deeper, more troubling assumption embedded in Western consciousness, that developing countries exist as permanent failures, that they have no success stories worth documenting, that they will forever remain frozen in a narrative of backwardness and chaos. Yes, slums exist in India. Yes, poverty is a harsh reality for millions. But here's the critical difference that Western media systematically erases: context and balance. Foreign television crews could easily document the explosion of startups transforming the economy. They could showcase India's revolutionary clean energy initiatives. They could film the space missions that have stunned the world. They could explore the cultural renaissance happening in arts, cinema, and literature. Yet they don't. Instead, they zoom in on Dharavi's narrow, congested lanes. But they conveniently forget to mention its billion-dollar informal economy that thrives with remarkable entrepreneurial spirit. They capture overflowing garbage on streets, but ignore the massive successes of the Swachh Bharat mission that has transformed sanitation across thousands of villages and towns. They highlight air pollution, but deliberately skip over ambitious efforts like the Namami Gange project, working to restore one of the world's most sacred rivers. This isn't journalism. When you systematically select only the negative while ignoring the positive, that's not reporting. It's propaganda dressed in the clothes of documentary filmmaking. So let's talk about what those documentaries refuse to show. Let's discuss the India that doesn't fit their pre-written script. India is now the world's fourth largest economy. Think about that for a moment. It has overtaken its former colonial ruler, the United Kingdom. The nation that once extracted trillions in wealth from Indian soil now stands behind India in economic rankings. India hosts the third largest startup ecosystem on the planet, with over 100 unicorn companies valued at more than $1 billion each. Bangalore alone files more technology patents than most European nations combined. The innovation happening in Indian tech hubs rivals anything in Silicon Valley. India's digital infrastructure doesn't just compete globally, it leads. The unified payments interface processes billions of transactions every single month, creating a cashless economy that Western countries study with envy. Aadhaar, the world's largest biometric identity system, has brought digital inclusion to over 1.3 billion people, a feat of administrative and technological achievement unprecedented in human history. India's vaccine manufacturing capacity quite literally powers global health initiatives. During the pandemic, while wealthy nations hoarded doses, India became the pharmacy of the world at space program, operating on budgets that seem impossibly small compared to Western space agencies, has achieved stunning milestones, landing on the moon's south pole, launching over 100 satellites in a single mission, sending a spacecraft to Mars on the first attempt. These aren't minor achievements. These are realities that fundamentally challenge the old narratives of a backward, struggling nation. And that's precisely why they get sidelined, minimized, or ignored altogether. Cities like Indore and Surat have transformed into models of cleanliness and waste management, studied by urban planners worldwide. Chandigarh, Mysore, and numerous other Indian cities maintain sanitation standards that match European metropolitan areas. But when did anyone see a documentary celebrating these transformations? The Delhi Metro, Mumbai Metro, and Bangalore Metro systems are efficient, clean, and world-class by any standard. Millions use them daily in comfort and safety. Engineering marvels like the Atal Tunnel, the longest highway tunnel above 10,000 feet, and the Mumbai Trans-Harbour Link showcase India's infrastructure, prowess, and ambition. But progress doesn't have the emotional pull that poverty does. Success stories don't trigger the same visceral reactions as images of suffering. And most importantly, achievement doesn't fit the script that's already been written, the narrative that's already been approved, the story that Western audiences have been conditioned to expect. So why does this pattern continue? Why does Western media cling so desperately to outdated narratives? The roots go deep, back to colonial history. For centuries, European powers portrayed colonized nations as backward, primitive, and incapable of self-governance. These characterizations weren't just racist. They were necessary justifications for exploitation and theft. If Indians were civilized and capable, how could colonialism be defended? Those frameworks didn't disappear when empires ended. They simply evolved, finding new homes in editorial boardrooms and documentary productions. The same underlying assumptions about superiority and inferiority continue to shape media decisions today. There's also an economic dimension. Negative stories generate more clicks, more shares, more advertising revenue. Tragedy sells in ways that triumph doesn't. Poverty and suffering create compelling visuals that keep viewers engaged. It's easier and more profitable to show crisis than complexity. But perhaps most importantly, there's a psychological resistance at play. Acknowledging India's rapid progress challenges deeply held beliefs about Western superiority and the supposed universal validity of Western development models. If India can succeed on its own terms, using its own methods, building its own systems, what does that say about the supposed inevitability of Western-style development? So the easier path, the more comfortable path, is to keep highlighting only poverty and chaos, to preserve outdated narratives that make Western audiences feel secure in their assumptions about how the world works and where different nations belong in some imagined hierarchy. This isn't just about hurt feelings or wounded pride. The consequences of this systematic misrepresentation are real and measurable. Young Indians studying or working abroad face relentless stereotypes. They spend exhausting amounts of energy constantly correcting misconceptions, fighting against images that were implanted in people's minds by years of biased media coverage. They have to prove, again and again, that they come from a nation of achievement and not just poverty. Within India itself, this distorted global image affects self-perception, particularly among the young. When the only stories the world tells about your country are negative, it creates psychological damage. It fuels brain drain, convincing talented Indians that their futures lie elsewhere. In nations that supposedly value progress and achievement, foreign investment suffers as well. Biased portrayals create fear and uncertainty among potential investors who might otherwise see India's enormous economic potential. Perception shapes capital flows, and negative perception costs jobs and opportunities. But the deepest cost is the denial of dignity. Every people, every nation, has a fundamental right to be seen fully, with both challenges and achievements acknowledged fairly. To be reduced to a single dimension, to have complexity flattened into simplicity, to have progress erased from the narrative, this is a profound injustice. So what's the response? What can be done when the gatekeepers of global media refuse to change their lens? First, Indian storytellers must reclaim the narrative, not with propaganda that ignores problems, but with honest, balanced stories that show the full picture. Document the struggles, yes, but also document the victories. Show the poverty, yes, but also show the innovation. Tell stories of challenges, yes, but also tell stories of resilience and achievement. Second, digital platforms have fundamentally changed the game. Indians no longer need permission from traditional media gatekeepers to tell their stories to the world. YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, independent documentaries. These platforms allow Indian voices to bypass the old systems entirely. Every Indian with a camera and an internet connection is now a potential storyteller who can reach global audiences directly. Third, demand accountability from international media. Don't stay silent when bias appears. Call it out. Offer the missing context. Point out the deliberate omissions. Organize. Make noise. Force these institutions to confront their double standards and colonial hangovers. Fourth, celebrate achievements with pride, not arrogance, but legitimate pride. When Indian scientists accomplish something remarkable, when Indian entrepreneurs build something innovative, when Indian artists create something beautiful, share it, amplify it, make sure the world knows. Success should be visible, not hidden. Fifth, build soft power through culture, art, and cinema. The world's image of nations is shaped as much by their cultural output as by news coverage. When Indian films, music, art, and literature reach global audiences with authentic stories, they create richer, more nuanced perceptions that counteract media bias. And finally, sustained progress will eventually force even the most biased outlets to acknowledge reality. Economic power creates leverage. Technological leadership commands respect. Scientific achievements demand recognition. Keep building, keep innovating, keep achieving. And the narrative will have to change because reality itself will leave no other choice. We live in an era that drowns in noise but starves for truth. An era where stories can circle the globe in seconds, but wisdom seems harder to find than ever. India is not a single story. It is not one image. It is not a freeze frame from a documentary made by someone who spent 2 days in Mumbai and claimed to capture a nation. India is ancient temples and modern skyscrapers standing side by side. It is innovation born in tech parks and wisdom passed down through generations. It is classical dance and cutting-edge science. It is street food vendors and space missions. It is poverty that must be addressed and progress that must be acknowledged. It is complexity, contradiction, challenge, and triumph, all existing simultaneously in a nation of breathtaking diversity. Will legacy media change their approach? Perhaps, perhaps not. Some institutions are too invested in old narratives to embrace new realities. But here's what matters more. India no longer waits for their approval. India no longer asks for permission to be seen as it truly is. The story of this nation is being written every single day by 1.4 billion people who are charting their own path forward, building their own future, defining success on their own terms. The credibility crisis doesn't belong to India. It belongs to those who refuse to see clearly, to those who cling to outdated scripts, to those who choose the comfort of old stereotypes over the challenge of new realities. And as India continues to rise, economically, technologically, culturally, the question becomes unavoidable. Will the world update its story, or will it be left behind, clinging to a narrative that no longer exists, filming a nation that lives only in their imagination while the real India moves forward without them? The choice has already been made. India isn't waiting for an answer.